Well, have you done a podcast before?
No.
No?
No.
You were in radio a
Virgin.
bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you like a DJ? Were you a board op?
Board op and DJ, yeah.
Both?
Well, I had the Tower CD Hour for 8 years, where I hosted that. The latest by classic artists. Of course, you had to be, classic artist.
So you got into radio through Tower?
No. I was actually working for ZLX before Tower.
Wow. So how'd you get in touch with them?
I'd gone to BU. I went to the School of Communications, which is now the College of Communications. Much more impressive.
Big upgrade.
Oh, yeah. And what's that? No. Anyway. I thought he had
just ignore the voices. They come out occasionally.
Voices, So, yeah, no, I went to the School of Communications and got the job with ZLX in 1985. They had changed over. I think they were an easy listening station called KAT or something. And I was one of the first people who came in and worked in the promotions department and in the production department, and then did board op overnight. Mickey will like this. I did the Monkees when everybody went to go see the Monkees in Foxborough in 1986. I had an 11-hour shift because I was the only one that would stay at the Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. The Monkees did their 20th anniversary tour in 86, 1966 to 86. And everybody at the station wanted to go. We were on the 42nd floor of the Hancock. Beautiful. Usually, you're in a DJ booth and it's no windows and it's really depressing, most of your studios. This had a panoramic view from the 72nd floor of the Hancock of the Back Bay in Boston Harbor.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my
That's
God.
Nice.
Used to sit in there, do the board op, and the sun's coming up in the morning, and you can see so far. It's like you see the curve of the earth and the first rays of the sunlight coming over the curve of the earth, and you're playing like Pink Floyd's Time,
That's
and you're just
amazing.
in there, and you're just it's epic. It's amazing. But they sponsored in 1986. The station was like a year old, and they sponsored the Monkees at Foxborough Stadium. I think before Gillette was there, and all the staff wanted to go. They wanted to meet the Monkees. They wanted to go out and be on stage for the Monkees. And they wanted to eat the food and, any swag. So
now, why were you, not eager to meet them?
I don't know. I just, I was the one who volunteered. I stayed at this station, 50,000 watts from Cape Cod to Maine, by myself, without even an engineer, because in those days, the transmitter was on the top of the Pru, and it was like, if anything goes wrong, you have to monitor you don't have to do any of this stuff anymore, but you had to monitor the transmitter, and it was just,
it's very manual.
I'm by myself in this huge space, and there was a station manager was a guy named Dave Mazzaros, who was hilarious, but he did everything he could to make me nervous. He would come. I was on from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Literally over noon or whatever. It was 11 hours or whatever, 11, 12 hours, because nobody was, taking a mid-shift or anything like that. They'd all gone to the show. So David comes in before and he says to me, he goes, "You got this? You all right?" I says, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'll be great." And he's like, he goes, "Oh, just wanted to let you know that we'll all be listening to ZLX on our way down to the station." I go, "Thanks, Dave. Fine." He goes, "Oh, I also want you to know that Bruce, the engineer, is also going to the show. So if anything goes wrong with the transmitter or anything, you got problems because there's nobody here to fix it." And I'm like, "Fantastic. Thank you, Dave." And he says, "Oh, one other thing." He comes in, he goes, "We're going to be playing the radio station, ZLX in between, acts of the Monkees going on. We're going to be piping into the stadium."
Wow.
And I go, "Thanks, Dave. No pressure. Don't worry about it." He goes, "So have a good show." And I'm like, but they all wanted to go. They wanted to do that. That was fine. It's amazing because that was so long ago, 86. Oh, my God. That was
wow.
The guy who relieved me that night at 11 o'clock. And I had so much music I had to put away. It was ridiculous. 11 hours of, in those days, it wasn't all on computer. It was carts. You know what carts are because you worked in radio.
Yeah.
One song on each one. You plug them into the board.
Yeah.
They're on spinner racks.
I took a history of radio class.
We had LPs, so we still spun vinyl. We had reel-to-reels. We had and we had carts, and that was about it. There was no CD players in '86 at ZLX. We got them later that year, but
Wow.
literally the first year we had no CD players in a station that big. It's mind-boggling. But
So it was a mix of everything. Was it? It wasn't just 45s. I just assumed that
no, we
people
were
were just.
we were playing album track. We had vinyl. We would cue it up. You know how you spin it back a little bit and everything. But it was amazing because when the person who came in to relieve me at 11 p.m. was somebody, I don't know if you've heard of him, John Laurenti. He's become kind of a staple in radio here in New England. He's worked in Providence. He's worked at stations in Boston. But he had just graduated. He's done a lot of things. He just graduated from Emerson, and that was his first job after Emerson College was to come in there, and
Wow.
he got hired as a board op overnight to do the overnight shift. So he was nice. He came in. I think he actually helped me put some music away. It took me forever to get everything because the station was a mess after 11 hours. You know, the booth was, put it that way.
Yeah.
So so that's how I got it. But then when I went to Tower in '87, I was doing both jobs.
Got it. Okay.
But I was only working part-time at ZLX at that point. And, they said, well, why don't we have this show called we'll call it the Tower CD Hour. And I was like, okay, fine. They go, you can do it. And I go, so I sort of brokered the deal because I had worked there, was still working there. And it worked out great. I thought that, honestly, I thought they would go, you gotta. I just didn't think it would last. Never mind 8 years. So what happened was ZLX got a good deal out of it. It was mutually beneficial. ZLX was able to build their library, which was classic artists, and they had a CD player now. They wanted to build it without spending a lot of money. So we would give them so many CDs a week as sort of our payment for the hour.
Okay.
It wasn't much. It was like 10 or 15. But the record labels wouldn't service them because they weren't breaking new artists. They weren't working, developing artists. So the record labels were like, why should we give you... All the labels, man, were like, why should we give you CDs? You're not promoting anything that we're promoting. You're doing catalog artists, artists from the past. So they cut this deal with us. They also ZLX got an end cap, end rack that said Tower CD Hour, and everything
Nice.
I played that week would go in the top row and would be on sale for the next week. Eric Clapton's got a new album. Aerosmith's got a new album. Rykodisc is remastering the Zappa stuff. We actually did a whole hour of Frank Zappa, which you'll never hear.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, I got a message. I got a note from the PD at the time. Buzz Knight sent me a note. I still have it. Was on the board when I went in on the DJ booth, and it said, "Please don't play Why Does It Hurt When I Pee?" Dynamo Hum, or the Illinois Enema Bandit. He said it. In other words, the inference was, don't play anything that's embarrassing, that's got the really sort of R-rated stuff. And I was like, fine. So we stuck to that and everything. But I thought that was hilarious. And then it said afterwards, have a great show. But you never see that today, where somebody's going to play an hour of Zap on a top 10 station in a top 10 market. It's just...
Maybe Sirius XM.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, now that they're owned by, I think, iHeartRadio, whatever they are, iHeart on Radio, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
But you just don't see that. So
Never.
It was the weirdest thing. It was just like, okay, so they liked the show. And then for our part, we used to have trivia questions. I would do trivia with people. And I would explain to them that trivia is not, you can't ask me a question. If you try and stump me, if you stump me, you want a CD or whatever like that. Don't ask me what the name of Paul McCartney's cat is, because that's trivial. That's not trivia. I said, if you ask me what the name of his sheepdog was, that's trivia, because it was Martha, who he wrote the song for. Mm-hmm. And he had a black Labrador named Jet, so you could say Jet. So people would come up with these questions. But the great thing was, if they won CDs, they would come into Tower to pick them up. Maybe they hadn't been to Tower before on Newbury Street, and it would drive more traffic in there. And, it was this mutually beneficial thing. So it just kept going and going. It was so weird. I always thought in those early years of ZLX, the first 6 or 7 years, they had like 6 PDs, program directors. It was like the Roman Empire. The turnover was like, seriously, was like people just not lasting for a lot of different reasons, which I can't even go on to here, into here, but it was just, I think it started out with Bill Smith. It was Gary Guthrie, then it was Bill Smith, and then it was, Cliff Blake, and then it was, who was after that was John Shambi. Before John Shambi, there was a guy named Mike Harrison, which probably doesn't mean much to you, but he was like, you've ever heard of George Taylor Morris, people like that who do syndicated shows?
Yes.
Mike Harrison was one of these guys who did syndicated shows all over the country, like the satellite shows and everything. And he was the most music cred guy to come in. When they told me, I was like, seriously, Mike Harrison? And I'd already been doing the Tower CD Hour for a couple of years and stuff. He was famous for his interviews. He had all these, in those days when he would do an interview, they would press it up on record, on LP, vinyl, and send it out to different radio stations.
The interview itself, wow.
Yeah, it would be pressed up, and it would have a cover with, and he did all, but it was, it would go into syndication. They would actually send it physically. They wouldn't do this today, but they would send it and play it, and it was open-ended, so you could sound like you're interviewing. But he did one.
That's funny.
He did one in 1976. Excuse me. That with George Harrison, and
wow.
it was Mike Harrison interviews George Harrison on George Harrison's new release, which was called 33 1/3, because revolutions per minute, but also George Harrison in 76 was 33 years old and a third. So double meaning, but he did this very famous interview, and I knew about, when I met him, I already knew who he was. So he was he did this interview, and he was a big Beatles fan and everything. So I came in, and I always thought to myself, how long is this Tower CD Hour thing going to go? Because we changed PDs, and I always think the next PD is going to come in and go, you got a guy from retail that comes up here once a week and does what? Takes over the station between 9 and 11, takes over the station, plays what he wants. And, what are you thinking? So I always think, we get a new PD, that's it, which is fine with me. Mike Harrison calls me in his office, and he says, Mike Harrison wants to see it. I'm like, oh, God. So I go in there, I meet him, I sit down, and he couldn't have been nicer. He was like, he goes, I listened to the show. He goes, you sound great. You don't sound like a DJ. You sound really knowledgeable. You sound like you're just talking to one person instead of doing the DJ thing. He says, I really love it. And he says, I understand. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. He says, I understand you're a big Beatles fan. And I said, yeah. I says, I know you interviewed George. He gave me a copy of the record, which I still have.
Wow.
But with it, I don't know if you've seen that cover, Brandon, but he wears these mirror glasses with the red, white, and blue around the rims.
Yeah.
And it has the Dark Horse's record label here right in the middle. He gave me a pair of those that George Harrison gave him.
Wow. And you still have those?
I still have them. Wish I had brought him for this. I'm not saying it's the one that Harrison wore on the cover, but when the album came out in 76, they made, I guess, a batch of them for promotional things. They sent them out to, radio and retail and maybe reviewers and stuff. But George had given him this pair when he did the interview with George. He says, I want you to have these. And I was like, I was blown away. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Wow. So that's a long explanation of how that whole thing started.
He might as well have just given you the glasses himself.
Oh my God! It was like his DNA's on this. This is Harrison actually touched these, but being a Beatles fan, that was fantastic. I finally pulled the plug on it in 1994 because my wife and I were having twins, and I couldn't keep both jobs. I couldn't go in at 9 a.m. and not get home until after midnight with twins. So
yeah,
but.
So what year did you start working at Tower?
87.
87, and then when did you become the manager?
The first year I was the closing manager the first year. So I did, till midnight shift, did the late shift as manager. The second year I moved to weekend manager. And then the third year, I became manager of the second floor, which was the rock floor. I don't know people who were there. This store was 55,000 square feet, 3 floors, escalators. We I think at our peak, we probably employed like probably 150 people, because the one store it wasn't unusual for us to do $1 million or $2 million a month.
Wow.
Yeah, I think, our best month, we probably did 2.5, maybe 3 in 93 before Christmas or something, because we had 22 registers. We were open 9 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week, even Sundays. But the opening crew, who was, composed of people who had to get the store ready for the next day, from the day before, and the people who worked in receiving, they wanted to get the stuff unloaded on Mass Ave and Newbury Street before the traffic started. They had to be in at 6 o'clock. So I think they worked 6 to, I want to say they worked 6 to 2 or something like that, or maybe 6 to 3. Then the mid shift would come in and work like, 10, well, maybe noon to 8 or something like that. And then the closing shift would come in and work 4 to midnight. So we had 3 shifts running this massive store. We had stuff that people never saw besides the 3 floors in the video store and the bookstore. We also had offices in the basement. We had a count-out room up above where all the money room was and everything. It was a small city. And it was a lot of fun. Eventually I was buying everything too. Not everything. I wasn't buying any third floor stuff, but the second floor pretty much rock, pop, soul, oldies. We had people who bought country and folk, but eventually when they left, that folded into me. Soundtracks folded into me. It was just, so I was buying a ton of stuff. All the alternative music was me, all the really fun, funky stuff. So it was a good time. So it sort of overlapped there, but it had to come to an end with ZLX in '84 because I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I was like, Newbury Comics hated it because they called it a hour or 2 hour commercial for Tower, which it was. We would talk about all the sales at Tower and come on down, and we had the winning CDs and stuff like that. It was a really mutual. That's why it lasted so long. Both sides were benefiting from it, something fierce. Wow. So when I wanted to quit, John Chomby and Paul Lemire, they kind of took me out to lunch and tried to talk me into staying, and I was like, no. I said, let somebody else do it. I can't. I've done it long enough. I've hung with it, and I just can't. And so I told my regional manager, who was Robert Stapleton at the time. I remember saying to him, I'm pulling out. I'm quitting, and he says, well. He says to me, how would you feel if it became the Newbury Comics CD hour? And I went, I says, well, chance we're going to have to take because I physically can't do it anymore, But it was very flattering. I suggested he do it, but he said he didn't have the time.
Did it become the...
No, it never did. They didn't want to continue it. So by that time they had this, a PD and Buzz Knight, I mentioned before. He had come in, I think at the end of '93. I think I first met him at the Christmas party, and he had he actually lasted for a while, and I think he had a different view. So it was good that it ended when it does, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So being a manager and stuff, that's how you met so many amazing artists.
Yeah, it was like we got to do things. I tried to include the clerks as much as I can because they didn't get to do as much fun things as management did. Like getting to the metal thing, there was a girl we had working there, Kathy, who worked in downstairs pricing. That's all she did. And I took her to lunch with Megadeth. We had lunch with Megadeth at Sauncey's on Newbury Street there, and Dave Mustaine was there, and you're going to kill me, but I can't remember the other band member that was there. And
David Ellison.
I think it was David Ellison. And she got to sit next to Mustaine and
wow.
Literally was glued to him and just loved it. And she worked with a guy named Jim Bragg, who I think lives down in Carolina now, but he was the other pricer. And I remember, I got tickets to a lot of things. I got tickets to Eric Clapton at the TD Garden, and he really wanted to go, and I said, well, here's a pair of tickets. And I remember he said to me, he goes, I don't have anyone to take, and I don't have any transportation. So I actually took him and went with him, which was the only time I ever fell asleep at a concert. I passed out at quite a few concerts.
At Clapton?
Yeah,
That's-
I had this talk with Haley and stuff. You know,
Have you talked?
And you saw
Have you
Clapton
talked
too,
about
right?
it? Yeah, I went
You
with
saw
my buddy
Clapton, yeah.
McWaters and Juan.
Yeah.
Did you hear Juan? He fell asleep during Layla.
Yeah, well, the problem was not to denigrate Clapton here, but I was tired and I really wasn't up to going, and particularly tired. And what it was is he had an album at the time. If people remember, it was called Pilgrim. Don't buy it. It had one minor hit, My Father's Eyes, but the album was like an hour long, really unnecessary, and it was very sort of mellow, to say the least.
And what year did this come out?
Oh God, this was probably the late '90s sometime.
Oh, late
It's called
90s Clapton.
Pilgrim. It's probably right up here somewhere. Oh, welcome to the Cheap Thrills.
Yeah.
Welcome to the. Is this running?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Cheap Thrills Record Bar. Here you go. We have lots of fun down here at Cheap Thrills
Lots
Music.
of fun, lots
in
of
Dedham,
fun.
10
Yeah.
Riverside Drive. Anyway, shameless plug.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I like these podcasts that happen very naturally, and the
Yeah.
reason I wasn't like,
I didn't even know
we're
this was
here,
on.
we're here with Rob Walsh of
Oh.
Cheap Thrills Records, because you don't even have like a Instagram, a Facebook page.
No.
It seems like this is just kind of almost like your vacation home, yeah, hobby.
It's my vacation home and hobby.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a hobby. Then a funny thing happened. LPs got really popular again. So now that's why we're up to our armpits in LPs. And no, it's sort of my, Brandon knows. He's come here enough. I just like to talk music, shoot the shit with people, make a little bit of money.
You got me into King Crimson.
King Crimson.
Yeah.
Yep.
Really ruined
And
my life
Frigid
with that.
Pink.
Frigid
Look
Pink.
it up.
Yeah.
Frigid Pink were a heavy, heavy hard rock band back in the day from Detroit. But
you mentioned Clapton. I do want to say I got I believe the album's called Private Eyes by Tommy Bolin,
oh yeah, I think that was his last album.
which came out a year before Slow Hand, I believe. And there's a song on it. I think it's Busting Out for Rosie. I forget what it is, but it's literally the cocaine riff on that record.
yeah. Tommy Bolin died at 24, I think. 24 or 25.
24, 25 were crazy.
And supposedly his last words were he goes, "Don't worry about me. I'm going to be around for a while." He did an interview for his new album at the time, and supposedly the interviewer says that the last thing he said, the interviewer said something like, "Take care of yourself," if I remember correctly, like that, and everything. He says, "Don't worry about me. I'm going to be around for a while." And he died that evening of a combination of
Wow.
heroin. Yeah, so
That evening?
might have talked that evening. So he might have talked to somebody after the interview, but the interviewer who was writing this article on him was like, boy, that's going to make a more interesting story now.
Wow. Such an underrated guitarist.
Yeah. Well, he was also with the James Gang. He replaced Joe Walsh. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
And he was also with Deep Purple.
Really? I
You didn't
should have
know
known that. I feel like I should have known that.
He replaced Joe Walsh in the James Gang when Joe Walsh left to go solo, and he played with Deep Purple. That Come Taste the Band, and he replaced Richie Blackmore. I think is he on the Stormbringer album too? I think so. But
I'll have to check.
he was for dying so young. He certainly was in a lot of important bands and important albums. So
Yeah, and the skill as a guitar player.
Oh, yeah.
And just like the songwriting was so amazing.
yeah.
Private Eyes is so good. Now, I brought up King Crimson, and I seriously, I think about this every time I look at the In the Court of the Crimson King cover of when you told me you met Fripp.
Oh,
and
God.
I'd love to know, if there's any memorable, artist encounters from Tower, from
there's lots.
orchestrating the meet and greets that stand out to you.
It seemed like we had in stores. We were there for 15 years, 87 to 2002, I believe, or something like that. I know we had a 15-year lease, and we had in stores constantly. So many great, literally thousands over that span. And there's a lot of memorable ones. I mean, Fripp was, if you want to hear about the Fripp one, I think you already heard it. But
Yeah, but if you can refresh my memory.
Fripp was coming in and he was playing at the Paradise, and he had Adrian Belew with him, and he had Trey Gunn. Two guys who also played in lineups of King Crimson. And so I was just as excited to meet them because Adrian Belew played with Bowie and a whole lot of other people, had some good solo stuff, and Trey Gunn on bass. And, we had a good in-store. He's very low-key. He's kind of known as a bit of a curmudgeon, really hard taskmaster. I saw him one time with a league of crafty guitarists, and he had an all-guitar ensemble, and he took the guitar away from one of the guitar players because he wasn't playing up to scratch, up to Fripp's anticipation. You know about this?
No.
And he took his guitar away. He put his stool in the corner and put a dunce hat on him and made him sit in the corner facing the wall for the rest of the show.
On stage?
Yeah, which we thought was part of the act or a skit, but obviously apparently he did that when he was displeased with someone. He's a bit of a tough nugget.
Wow.
So he actually, at this time, we went through the whole in-store, and the employees would go through last, kind of thing. And I had my copy of Court of the Crimson King, my vinyl since, high school, and I brought it up and I said, I love this album. It was a big part of my high school years. I've always, just one of my favorite records. And he just looks at me like this and I go, would you sign it? So I wish I had brought it. It would be hilarious. So,
and you still have this?
Yeah. So he takes out a Sharpie and he starts doodling on the cover like this, like over the Scream guy, like that it's based on that famous picture, The Scream by, I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
So he's defacing my album. Then he opens up the gatefold and he does this big word balloon. It says, "Yo, Rob," like that. And he just kind of scribbles some more and he hands it back to me and I went, and he knows who I am. He knows that I work there and I'm, one of the managers. And I said, thanks. I said, I could have done that. And I said, now do you want to sign it? And he just looked at me. You can't really raise a fuss because the next thing you know, he's going to complain to corporate or something. Yeah. So you have to be nice. He's your guest. And I said, would you like to sign it? And he goes, I just did, like that. And I went, so I went over to his handler, one of his employees. She actually worked for Discipline, his record label. And I think he was running it out of his house at the time. And I said, what's the matter with Robert? I go, what was that all about? And she says, he's been in a lawsuit with Atlantic Records to get back the rights to the Atlantic albums, Court of the Crimson King, Wake Up Aside, and all that stuff, Bible Black. They've been in this lawsuit, and he lost the latest round, so he's kind of like pissed at Atlantic in that period. And I said, and you're taking it out on me?
Wow.
A record store employee who's the bottom, the catfish of the industry, the bottom feeders. And he's like, yeah, he's just really pissed about it. And I go, well, that's love. But it's kind of like, it's a unique conversation piece now. We're talking about it now, but it was like, it was really just, and I go, well, I had a Fripp moment, I guess.
I assume most of them were nice. Most of the musicians who came in.
Overwhelmingly. Only a few, that kind of thing. We had some, Morrissey was a pill. Who else? Oh my God, Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics. He wasn't very nice. I shouldn't be saying this, but most people were. Were
artists ever just drugged out at these?
Oh yeah, Ozzy, big time.
Ozzy? Oh yeah. So he came in for a in store.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to know about that.
He came in, I think it was in 1998, Sabbath did and I love Sabbath. You know me.
We were just talking about
metal.
Sabbath.
I'm like, we were talking about the Mayhem Fest and I had an all stage, I got to hang out with Anthrax and Motorhead and Slayer. I was in heaven. But my high school years, I'm much older than I look. My high school years were Sabbath's first 5 records, so we just love them. Those days I was all about the current artists, which were Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Alice Cooper, David Bowie. That was my wheelhouse and all my friends. Steppenwolf, just incredible stuff. And the Sabbath comes in, and I think it was 1998. They had an album called Reunion. Do you remember that one? It was a double
live
disc.
Album. Yeah. They just reissued it.
They did this for their 30th anniversary. '69 to 1999. And they had they did covers of their songs and stuff like that. So we got all four of them. We had We had Ozzy came in, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, Bill Ward. It was insane that we got the four. I mean, we had a line that went, past the ICU, past the fire station there on Boylston Street. I mean, over the bridge. It was incredible, and they were so nice. They stayed, I think, just about forever. There had to be thousands of people in line, and they were just so thrilled to meet the band. But Ozzy came in, and this was before the Osbournes, and it was before any of that had started, and he was still drinking heavily. He hadn't gotten on the wagon yet. And no matter what people think of Sharon, I know she's a lightning rod for stuff. I've only had good encounters with her, but she definitely saved his life. I mean, there's no question about it, because he was, his liver must have been mush. But he came in and he was like going through the DTs, the delusion tremors. He shakes now anyway, but this was, 25 years ago now. And he was shaking like crazy, and he was sweating, but he was just all clammy, and his skin was white as alabaster. I mean, the only color he had in his face or his arms or anything is what they call, like the band, I don't know if people realize the band, the Gin Blossoms. Gin Blossom is when an alcoholic, when you're so permeated with alcohol that the capillaries break under your skin, and you get these little like rosebuds, like W.C. Fields. Your nose turns red and everything, and that's what it is. They're called gin blossoms, and that's the only color he had. He looked terrible.
Wow.
He came in, and I shook hands with him at the beginning, the whole band, and when I shook hands with him, his hand he was sweating, but it was ice cold. He was like, it was clammy. It was cold as could be, and I'm not a germaphobe, but I actually went in and washed my hands afterwards, because I was like, ugh. And I never, and I thought, I got to get this guy's autograph, because he's going to be dead in a couple of months. Literally 25 years later, who'd he fool, But honestly, he just looked terrible, and he just wasn't acting right either. I mean, not that he's, but he was like just so out of it. Like, that was your question is. And the other guys weren't. So they set up, the table, they came in from the Newbury side, and they had Tony Iommi was first, then Geezer, then Bill Ward, and Ozzy was last. So they would come down the table, and they would sign things for people. And I sat behind Ozzy and Bill Ward at the end of the table. So I got to see all these people's reaction. People were just so happy, bringing in all kinds of memorabilia. They would sign anything, which was really good. They brought in, I don't know if you remember, but I think it was not Volume 4. It was the third album.
Master of Reality.
Master of Reality came with a poster in it originally.
Yeah.
And people were bringing in their poster to have that signed.
Oh, my God.
I wish I had thought of that. I know. The poster from Master of Reality, people had thought to bring that. It was really a good time. But Ozzy was so freaking out of it. But he was giddy. He was like a little kid just laughing and, his hair, going through his hair. He definitely was, he's like pulling on his hair. So... it was just one of these things where they would go down and they would meet everybody. And Bill Ward had his head shaved. Do you remember he had he had the brain surgery right before. He had a brain aneurysm or something. I don't know what it was. But you could see his head was still shaved. And he had scars where they had operated on him. And Ozzy was, signing with a black felt pen, Sharpie. And he, at one point, I'm sitting behind him and he's looking like this and he's looking around. And he looks over at Bill and he goes like this. He just looks at Bill and he goes. And it was like he saw him for the first time. Like what's he doing here? It was classic. So Ozzy he had been signing stuff, but he had been doodling on the tablecloth and stuff. So he looks at Bill and he sees Bill's bald head is like a palette. And he starts doodling on Bill's head.
Was Bill pissed?
Well, Bill was like, it was interesting because Bill kind of at first was just swatting him like an annoying fly swatting around your head. Well, stop it. Stop it. It's like, because at this point, it'd been 30 years of this. this was nothing new for Bill. You remember the stories about they used to set him on fire. They used to flick matches at him. I think twice.
Spray painted him gold.
They spray painted him gold. They would flick matches. Twice he caught on fire. Once, I know at least once he had to go to the hospital. He would fall asleep in the recording studio because he didn't have anything to do while they were working out, guitar parts or arrangements or whatever. So they would flick lighted matches at him and set him on fire, which sounds, but you got to realize these guys were from, where was it?
Birmingham.
Birmingham. I mean, it's like, yeah, this is probably one of the tamer things you do. But you set your friends on fire. So he's just like swatting, Ozzy and everything. I didn't even know if I should say this last part, but I told you what happened. But, well, I mean...
You can say it.
I don't know.
I feel like worse things have come out about...
This was really bad. I really like Ozzy, but
okay.
He actually drew this symbol on the side of Bill's head.
Oh, swastika?
Yes.
Probably because he looked like a skinhead.
Probably.
But I don't think Ozzy's a Nazi.
Oh, I don't think so at all. But in his state of mind...
Was it like a Sharpie?
It was a Sharpie.
Yeah, that's not good.
It was with a black... So, yeah. Big surprise, folks. So these people are now coming down the line, and they're all happy, and they get to Bill Ward, and all of a sudden they're like going, oh, hi, and they go, oh, and you can see their, shock on their faces, and Bill has no idea. So I didn't want it to go too far, so I leaned over to Bill, and I said, you might want to take a bathroom break. By the way, I should interject here how bad Ozzy was at the time. Ozzy had already been to the bathroom several times where the security people we had for Tower had walked in back and forth and told me that every time he went in there, he was throwing up.
Oh, God.
So, yeah, he was... Bill says, yeah, he says, take a break. You want to go to the bathroom, take a break. So Bill gets up and goes to take a bathroom break. He comes back, and he walks behind, going to his seat, he walks behind Ozzy like this, and as he goes by, he says something like, you fucking get, he whacks him off the back of the head. We're talking about, he hit him fucking harder than Will Smith hit Chris Rock. I mean, this was a bang off the back of Ozzy's head, and he's cursing at him, and he sits there, and you could see where Bill had smeared, so you couldn't, it was unrecognized. He couldn't get it off, but he had smeared this big black thing on the side of his black spot on the side of his head. And Ozzy, for his reaction, all he could do was sit there and go, he was like laughing like this. He's like, and it was just like, yeah, just rolling off him. But it was a great in-store. But you were asking about people who were messed up. That was probably the most messed up anyone I had seen come into the store. But it still was it was what you kind of expected, I guess.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
It was crazy.
The stories you've told me from those days.
We had such fun there. We really did. We had just unbelievable. We had Jeff Buckley come in. He died very young, drowned when he was only 27 in the Mississippi. He was Tim Buckley's son. He came in when his album Grace came out. He played an entire set. Did Hallelujah, his version, twice. He had his whole band with him. We just had wonderful people. We had the Red Hot Chili Peppers. That's another story. It was almost as bad as the Sabbath one.
Oh,
probably worse in some ways, actually.
The early 90s.
Yeah. Let's just say they took the title of the album Mother's Milk way too far.
Oh, God.
But, yeah, that's something I'm not going to tell.
Yeah.
That was, they're lucky they didn't have cell phones with cameras in them at the time. But we had so many people, just, great people. We had a Duran Duran one. We had Weird Al Yankovic. We had, just everybody could.
Iggy Pop?
We had Iggy. No, Iggy was just the guy that I went drinking with twice.
Okay, so that's not connected to Tower.
That was at a club, that picture you see of me and Iggy. Drinking 4:00 in the morning at a club that served after hours. But
so real quick side note. So how'd that even happen? How'd you meet Iggy? I don't think you've ever told me.
He was with some people from Warner Brothers, and what happened was we had gone out bar hopping, and this was late 80s. This is before we had kids, so You saw the picture of what I looked like in those days. I looked like Jack Black. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was Jack Black before Jack Black. I mean, I really, before the kids came along, I had quite a liquid lifestyle. And so we were just going for bar, and then 2:00 came around. So somebody said, I don't know where it came from, but somebody said, I know a bar they serve after 2 a.m. if you keep it on the down low, and it turned out to be on the side street in the Fenway. Of course, it was a gay bar called. I don't know if people remember. It was called Pipeline, not the
I've heard
Ramrod.
of it. I've heard
Ramrod's the famous one, which was there for a long time, but. There was this place called Pipeline, and sure enough, you go there, and if you keep it on the down low, so somewhere around 4 a.m, we'd been drinking heavily. He was drinking heavily, and that's where you see the picture. A friend of mine, I can't remember from Warner Bros. I don't know if it was Bobby Hall or who it was, but somebody took a picture of the two of us just at the bar. We weren't even posing, and it's a classic. I'm
gonna edit it in.
You gotta
into this.
Edit the picture, and they'll see it. I think a picture's worth a million words.
So it was a friend of yours worked at Warner Brothers.
Well, I knew a lot of people at the labels, and they would invite us to stuff when like.
And Iggy was just there.
Well, no, it was. They knew that they were going to be with Iggy. Do you want to come along? Kind of thing,
Yeah.
It's like they would call you up and say, "Hey, Lenny Kravitz is coming to town. Would you like to go out to dinner?" And then one time, I remember we went out to Jillian's in the Fenway, and they rented out all. You've been to Jillian's, all the arcade machines and the pool tables and the pitching cages and everything. They rented it out. We played all the machines and games with Lenny. I mean, stuff like that. We would just have the artists at these things. But
that's so awesome. I can't even imagine that. Like just being a kid and listening to all these records as they come out, and now you're just drinking with them.
Getting to meet everybody was like, and by 4 a.m. we come out of there, the sun was coming up. So, but it was funny because of the picture. I don't really remember the picture being taken so much, and Iggy was kind of, the picture will sell. But anyway, I remember him correcting me. At one point, I called him Iggy, and he said, "No," he says, "Please," he says, "call me Jimmy." He goes, "All my friends call me Jimmy." I remember this, and me being really lit too. I was like, "Oh, am I your friend?" Like a drunk talks kind of thing. He looks at me and he goes, he says, "Of course you're my friend," like that, So without missing a beat, I think this was before Thanksgiving or something. I don't remember. But he says, "Of course you're my friend." And so I said, "Can I come over for the holidays?" And I think the way I said it he kind of sensed that I would actually show up, which I probably would. He says he had the perfect rejoinder. He says, "I think we should take this friendship a little more slowly."
Yeah, you gotta shoot your shot, I guess.
Yeah, it was. I would have shown up. Yeah, I would have much rather done that than gone to my relatives. So.
Yeah, you have a whole like a photo album, like a book. And you can flip through it, and it's just all the. And you have the Stones and McCartney too. You met that must have been
Stones.
Crazy. Meeting McCartney.
Absolutely, McCartney. The McCartney thing was great because it wasn't every one of these. If you go to a backstage or a meet and greet or something, they're all different. Some of them are just like slide in, take a picture, slide out. Mm-hmm. The McCartney thing was in '99, I think. October '99.
McCartney was doing meet and greets. Like you can pay for it. So this was press.
This was a totally different animal. I got a call from Barbara Prismuth, who was I think the regional for Capitol at the time. And McCartney hadn't done anything for a whole year. Linda died, I think, in April of '98, and he was off the grid for a whole year. His year of mourning. This is before he went out with Heather Mills or any of that. Before he married her, or she was around. And when he decided to come out, he released an album called Run Devil Run, which was all 50s covers of songs he liked, a lot like John Lennon did for the rock and roll album. And Barbara invited me to go to the record release party in New York. It was at the Hammerstein Ballroom, I think it was, on 52nd Street in the shadow of MSG.
Wow.
And they had a radio station in New York had invited listeners, these listener winners, to be there to listen to, and they said McCartney will be there. And so he came out on the stage, And he does a little song and dance, and talks about the making of the album. Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd played guitar on it. I think Ian Pace, as I remember, was the drummer from Deep Purple on that album. And he did he's very entertaining. He's a very charming, affable, outgoing guy. And and people were waving stuff for him to be signed. And he was like, no, I'm sorry. If I sign for you, I got to sign for everybody. And we don't have time for that. So then they played the album. And then he came out at the end and did a little wrap-up thing for the radio contest winners. And I was up in the VIP balcony, which is like I am, but there were people up there who was interesting. Gilbert Gottfried was up there. May Pang was up there. Do you know her?
No.
She is the secretary that Lennon and Yoko had, that John moved to LA with in 74, 75. He lived with her for a year and a half. She just had a movie come out, which is very, very, very good. So there was all these people up there, people like that, and so I was surprised. I didn't even know it was really going to happen. And Barbara come up to me and says, we're going back to Paul's hotel room. Would you like to go? And I went, let me think about it. Yeah. Okay. So we go back. This is where it turns into a Fellini movie. It's like the Four Seasons here in Boston. I was in the Stones hotel suite. These aren't rooms, these are suites. They have the whole floor. And you have to go and you have to have the right credentials to get in the elevator. And that elevator only goes to that floor, so people can't get off. There's no one else on that floor like there was, like same thing in New York. It's like a private elevator, so they don't have like people just or fans or just trying to find them and wander around. So we go over to the hotel and we go up and get off at the floor, and I walk in, and literally as I'm walking off the elevator into the room, I bump into McCartney like this, and Barbara Prismuth exaggerates my credentials, which I don't like, but she said, "Oh, this is Rob Walsh. He's the East Coast regional for Tower Records." And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a store manager. And McCartney just like grabbed me, gave me a hug, and just said, he goes, "How you doing?" Blah, like that. It was like really, real P.T. Barnum kind of,
believe it.
very friendly. I thought he didn't seem to have an ego. I mean, I've seen him when he's kind of a little egotistical in interviews and stuff, but he seemed like completely devoid. I would have it, tattooed on my forehead if I was him, but he seemed incredible. So we go in, and who's the first person after McCartney I run into the room? Rudy Giuliani's there.
Wow.
He's mayor of New York, of course, in 1999, and he's there with his political posse. This is before people knew what they know about him today. This was pre 9/11, so he doesn't stay long. And then Woody Harrelson shows up with Lawrence Fishburne, and Judy Collins is there, and this is really a Fellini movie. Everybody is somebody except for me. I mean, I'm just like, what am I doing here? And so Giuliani and his posse leave. They've done their little hello. And immediately Woody breaks out this, skunkweed, this like pot. And we're sitting in this room that's all white. It's like white walls, white shag rug, white leather couch. It looked like I was sitting on a cloud. I thought maybe I had died. I was a little nervous because I'm used to doing these things, but McCartney's a different animal, and I didn't know how to react. And I'm sitting right next to him. He's literally sitting on my right side like this, and Woody Harrelson's here, and Woody Harrelson is rolling these big fatties, and he's talking like, if you've seen Apocalypse Now, Dennis Hopper to Colonel Kurtz, Marlon Brando at the end, he's rambling because he's really stoned. I think him and Fishburne, it looked like they were already pretty well herbed up when they got there. And so he fires this up and he hands it to McCartney. And I don't really smoke that much pot anymore. Not since high school, but it's not like the stuff I had in high school. It smelled like a skunk went off in the room that sprayed. It was really pungent and just awful smelling. And McCartney takes this big, Woody Harrelson, McCartney takes this big drag. We know Paul likes it, he been smoking his whole life. And then he passes it to me, and I'm such an idiot. I started to go, no thanks.
Oh my God! Are you kidding me?
Just out of habit, and I hadn't really smoked since high school, didn't do it. And then I thought, well, what the heck? So I took a drag. I figured his saliva's on it or whatever. I took a drag, and it burned the fuck out of my throat. It was like it was
dry.
Oh my God! It was like it just burned, and it was just like so. Oh, and I thought to myself, this is what he does to that wonderful voice. This is how he spoke, and no one seemed to notice this but me. I mean, everyone else is like, oh, this is normal. This is like, and I'm just thinking pot didn't smell like this. It didn't burn, and it wasn't so harsh on my throat. Anyway, it was fun. I actually, besides that, little sidebar, in 1977, I was backstage with Tom Waits when he was touring on the Small Change record. He played UMass Amherst, and they did a show where there was an intermission, and he was backstage shooting down Jack Daniels out of the bottle, and so when he performed in the second place, in the second half of the show, he did a song called "The Piano Has Been Drinking," and honestly, he wasn't. The song is about a piano's drunk. Now, guy keeps hitting the wrong notes, but he's blaming it on the piano. The piano's drunk. But I think Tom was actually, method actor. He was. He kind of he was a bit tipsy himself because he actually sort of, I don't even ask, motioned at me, do you want some? So I took a hit out of the bottle, and my roommate, who was also on the concert committee at UMass. He declined. He said, ugh. And so, having a joint with McCartney and taking a hit of Jack Daniels from Tom Waits is probably, outside of my kids, of course, kids the best, birth of my kids, wedding day, probably two highlights.
Top 10, yeah.
Yeah, top two probably.
Yeah.
And I remember a roommate on the way back after the show. By the way, it was $2 to see Tom Waits. It was $3, $2 with a student ID. We are talking about 77. So my roommate says, ugh. He goes, how could you drink out of that bottle after him? He says, that guy looked like he had leprosy. And I said, that's partially an act. He dresses like a Skid Row sort of hipster / Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg. That's part of a show, but he looked all disheveled and like a really Skid Row Columbo, Skid Row Columbo. I like that.
Yeah.
So I said what Tom would have said. I said, well, I figured the alcohol would kill any germs, that kind of thing. So back to McCartney. So McCartney is, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, don't do anything stupid. Don't say anything stupid. Don't say, oh God, remember when you were in the Beatles or anything stupid like that, like that great Chris Farley skit or whatever. So I finally said, oh, I thought this would be interesting. I didn't really think it through.
No.
And when I got his attention, I said, when he sit next to me, I said, by the way, my wife was going to come to this, but she couldn't because we have twin boys at home who are 3.5, and no one wants to watch them, which I totally understand because they're like drunken midget Terminators. Yeah, nobody ever wanted to watch these two. So anyway, she said, she's very disappointed. So he says to me, really nice. He likes this. Oh, he goes, give him my love, won't you? And I said, not thinking it through all the way. No one had mentioned Linda. That was kind of the elephant in the room. My wife's name is Linda.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I thought I was going to get thrown out. So I said to him, well, the only reason I married her anyway is because her maiden name is Linda Mary. And he knew exactly what I was talking about because Linda was his wife who died of breast cancer the year before. And his mother, Mary, who's the mother he's talking about in Let It Be, of course, had died of breast cancer, I think, when he was like 16. Damn. So when I said I only married her jokingly because her name was Mother Mary, he had this look on his face, like this shock, and he just started to tear up. And I went, oh my God. I made Paul cry. I'm going to be beaten and thrown down the elevator shaft because everybody in the room was like, "You don't bring up Linda." You know what I mean? It was just understood that was, like I say, the elephant in the room. But he was very gracious. He said to me, he puts his hand on my knee, and he says, he goes, "Don't go there." He says, "You're going to get me all weepy." And I was like, it was like this Pinocchio moment. It was sort of like, instead of Wood, he was a real boy. Like he's not this icon, Paul. This is a real human moment. It's sort of like he really is a real boy.
He's one of us.
Yeah, he's one of us.
Yeah.
It's like that's why I say Pinocchio moment. It was like, oh my God, it was so touching.
Wow.
And he was like, but I did think about it on the way back. When I went to my hotel, I stayed over that night. When I went back, did I stay over? I can't remember if I did. But then when I left,
stayed over at Paul's place.
No. God, no. This was what I say was odd. Is instead of just a meet and greet, I was there for a couple of hours. There's a picture up there too. You saw it with the Paul. You saw it, didn't you?
Yeah.
It's up there.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
from that
I'm looking
night,
at it right now.
From that
I
night.
think.
But it was, you got to actually hang out with him and talk and just get to.
What a good story.
We talked
Jesus.
about other stuff too. It was great. It was so funny. There was a point where I had actually brought two 45s, picture sleeves for him to sign. And he signed one of them, and I said, "Could you sign the other one?" And he looks at me, he goes, "There's a market for this sort of thing." And I went, "Well," I go, "I'm not." He goes, it mustn't. "Mustn't be greedy, Rob." And it was so funny when he goes, "Mustn't." I'll never forget that either. And this was before eBay. So he signed the one, and then the other one, I said, well, the only reason I had two is because I have two boys. I have twins, and I was going to give one to each of them. And he says, no, I'm only doing one per person, which was fine. But the one that I gave him was really rare. It was something he'd never seen before. So I thought for a moment there he was actually going to ask me for it. It's for something that he did in 1966. He did the theme song for a movie called The Family Way. And it was a 45 that had never been sold commercially. It was just sent to radio. It was a white label promo. And on it said, "Attention radio programmers, this is a Paul McCartney song. Please play." It's the first thing anyone Beatle had done outside of the Beatles in 1966. Wow. The reason he'd never seen it because the band who recorded it wasn't him. It was a band called the Brass Ring or something, and it was on a different record label in Capitol. It was on Dunhill. So not surprising he had never seen one, but I thought he was going to ask me for it. It seemed like there for a moment.
How do you react?
When he said, he was looking at it, he goes, "What's this?" And he says, "I know what it is." He says, "But I've never seen this before." And I said, when I told him, I thought for sure he was going to go, "Huh, can I have?" I was like, "Oh, geez." Well, at least I had the other thing to sign. But anyway, you
still own this.
He was lovely, of course.
Like the Paul McCartney signed.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Well, we might as well if you're there, and if you're a big Beatles fan. It was like it's a remembrance of that night too. It's a long story to get there, but anyway, that was a lot. That's the kind of stuff that you got to do that you never imagined you'd be able to do, and you don't imagine these people as being real people, Well,
I think you told me once that you thought the Beatles were the most original band ever.
It seemed like it when I was growing up. It was always, we couldn't wait for the next album to drop because they were always pushing the boundaries of music farther. They were always doing things that people had never done before. They were always doing things that sounds and song structures and everything that you'd never heard before. It sort of opened it up for everybody. Musicians, anyone who was out there at the time making music, from the Beach Boys to Pink Floyd and on down, were like, man, this is inspiring to us. This shows us that we can do things, and there's also a commercial side to it too. People will actually love it and buy it and everything. Remember Roger Waters saying something like that, and Brian Wilson, saying
we were just talking about
same thing. Yeah. So they were. I don't see anyone really today that's sort of like it's pushing music into places where it hasn't been before. I guess would be the best way. I remember every album that came out, we were just like, because they were growing so quickly in such a short amount of time. They were just growing from album to album like exponentially. It was incredible what they were coming up with.
What a thing to cherish, like being able to buy the album when it comes out. You know what I mean? Hamlet apparently is its name.
Hamlet, yes. It's not Yorick anymore. It's Hamlet. Hamlet's
Yorick.
now dead, as we know. And he has a lot of questions, but we'll talk about those afterwards.
Well, I do want to say, so your favorite band of all time, we're in a record store. You know a lot about music. It's the Kinks. Is the King or is it Steppenwolf?
It's probably when I was young, Steppenwolf were they ruled the earth. They were probably what got me into hard rock and segued me into metal. Loving metal so much is that, when I heard Born to Be Wild when I was in 7th grade, it just, it's one of those songs that just ripped your head off.
Heavy metal thunder,
Yeah, and they named the genre, and I just really, then came Magic Carpet Ride and Rock Me and, Monster and, just one right after another. And it was just, for 2 years, 3 years, they burned so brightly. They were like, I saw them when I was in 8th grade. With Frigid Pink opening from Detroit. Check out Frigid Pink. Some of you might know them. But it just, them, the Beatles, of course, were a huge impact, and the Kinks. I just love the Kinks. I think the Kinks.
Yeah, you told me that you think they're the second most original band.
Well, I think they're the second most important band.
Oh, interesting.
To come out, yeah. They're the second most important rock band, or, to come out of England. I mean, only the Beatles, can claim a better legacy than the Kinks. And people have talked to me here in the record store. We have debates, and they say, well, what about the Stones? What about the Who? What about Zeppelin? What about Pink Floyd? What about, you wouldn't put them ahead of the Kinks? And it's no, because if you look at it objectively, it's not about how famous you are, how many records you've sold, it's what your criteria is. If you're looking at, how popular they are in pop culture, it would be the Stones or something like that. If you're looking at their catalogs, I know Stones fans will disagree with this and stuff, but if you're just looking at their catalogs, all the evidence is there. The Kinks continued to make good music long after these bands had folded tent, and the Stones weren't doing great albums. I've seen the Stones well over a dozen times, and their output after Some Girls in '78 is not stellar. They've had their successes, and the Kinks just continued into the '80s strong. And Ray Davies is just such a brilliant songwriter. It's if your criteria is, instead of popularity, albums sold and hype, if your criteria is originality, as you said, creativity and influence on on other musicians and the arts in a whole, Kinks win hands down against those other bands. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Pete Townsend, who doesn't like anybody. I mean, no offense, Pete, but I mean, I met him. He was a nice guy when I met him, which was a whole different thing, because he had just finished, carving a new asshole for his crew, which he was unhappy with, and we actually thought about sneaking out. But
wow.
He's known for his, he's very blunt. You can see his stuff on YouTube talking about Zeppelin and how, he doesn't think very much of them, and Jimmy Page is a good guitarist, but
did he have opinions about the Beatles too? He wasn't crazy about them?
The thing is that a compliment for Townsend is you don't suck. That's about as high as you get from Townsend, which is cool, because that's sort of, it seems like his persona over the years. But I saw him in an interview, so I saw him actually speak these words where he said something, I don't know if I'm getting it verbatim, but he sort of said, he goes, I wish I could write songs as good as Ray Davies. And I was like, what?
Whoa.
I mean, come on, Pete, you've written some great songs, but even he realizes, with the Beatles, you had Lennon and McCartney, but Ray was just, his brother Dave wrote some stuff, good songs, but Ray was the genius. I mean, that just, unbelievable for one person to have that kind of an output. And they definitely had a run of genius records that, even after they did all those great singles, from 64 to 67, and there were a lot of great singles, they come out with, Something Else, and after Something Else was, what was it? The one with the flowers on the cover there. Can't think of it. Something Else.
Flowers on the cover.
Yeah, I can't remember that. But they had this run of albums. It was like, then it was Village Green, and then it was Arthur, and then it was Lowell and Boswell Hillbillies. It was just like unbelievable.
Showbiz, too.
Every song just fantastic. He has a way of writing that is so vivid. You can picture the characters that populate his songs in your mind. He loves to make fun of small-minded people in small English towns and their follies and their foibles. I mean, he's just so creative,
And also, like,
It's ridiculous.
against the label and against corporate greed and stuff, especially on a showbiz. Isn't that, like, pretty much a whole diss album?
Lola versus Power Man and the Money Go Round. This was a brand new label. They had left Warner Brothers and gone to RCA. And he a brand new label, and he's attacking them. I mean, Lola's the artist, pretty much, a transvestite, but she's the artist. And you got Power Man, which is the record label, and the merry-go-round is where all the money goes, not to the artist. The song "The Money Go Round."
Great song, yeah.
Yeah, it's like people making money off of songs they've never heard.
Yeah.
It's just so he doesn't mince any words like Townsend, and but he's just so creative, and they continued to just pump out hits during the 80s right up until almost the 90s when they finally broke up. But if you look at their catalog and compare it to the other big British bands, you'll find that as far as creativity, originality, and influence goes, only the Beatles can claim a higher spot, I think. But that's the kind of we like to talk. I like to talk music with the customers.
Well, this is why I wanted to do this podcast, because I think some of the things you've taught me about music and our conversations are so cool, and like some of the stories you told here. Now you said you and I just want to say this about the Kinks. I feel like the Kinks are almost like underrated. Maybe not underrated, but
they are
compared to the
Yes.
Who, compared to Rolling Stone, even Pink Floyd, Queen, even.
We don't know what would have happened if they weren't. I don't think a lot of people, their fans know, but a lot of people, they were banned from the U.S. for 5 years, from 1960.
The Kinks?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
They couldn't tour here. So this whole time
Why?
they were having, something else, the album with the flowers, something else, Face to Face, Village Green, Arthur, Lola, Muswell Hill. When they were having this incredible streak from 1967, the golden age, till 1971, they finally could in 1970. But they had a pot bust here in '65, and they had their passports revoked, and they couldn't. All those great albums up until Lola in 1970, they couldn't come here and promote them. They couldn't do come in and be on U.S. radio shows and promote them, radio stations. They couldn't do shows, on TV here. They couldn't do concerts, and that really does help an album tremendously.
100%.
And for 5 years, they all through the first four of those, from '67 to '69, something else, Face to Face, Village Green, which is a masterpiece, is their pepper, and Arthur, they couldn't tour on those albums. They still had minor hits here, but nothing. So that really hurt their profile and everything. When they finally could tour, when the ban was lifted, when they went from Warner Brothers to RCA in 1970, and they made Lola, what happens? They come over and tour. Lola, #1 hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta think, that would have happened the last 4 or 5 years had they been able to promote these great albums.
It's such a shame. It really is a shame. And you also told me a story that kind of ruined the album Who's Next for me, where it was supposed to be, wasn't it supposed to be a double LP?
Yeah, it was supposed to be something called Lifehouse.
Was it Life? I thought it was Lighthouse.
No,
it's
Lifehouse. Yeah. It was like Tommy. It was supposed to be, remember how the album before it, Tommy, was the 2 records that told the story about Tommy, the Deaf, Dumb, and Blind Boy and everything. And the album after Who's Next was Quadrophenia. And it told the story about the whole thing with the British kids, the mods versus the rockers versus the boys who dressed, with all the fluffy collars and stuff. But I love that because, of course, Ringo had that great quote at the time. You had to belong to a certain, youth culture. And they asked him, you remember this? I probably don't remember. But they said to him, are you a mod or a rocker? And he goes, neither. He goes, I'm a mocker. So Townsend wrote about those early days of his youth. But Who's Next was supposed to be the same thing. It was supposed to be a 2-record set. There was a protagonist. There was a love interest. Her name was Mary. There was a song written, Mary, that didn't make that. He had this whole, storyline over 2 albums, but he hadn't finished it, and the record label, because of the success of Tommy and everything, was pressuring him. In those days, you were supposed to give them, your contract called for most bands to have 2 albums a year of new material.
Ridiculous.
Live albums didn't count. Compilation greatest hits didn't count, and bands did it. The Beatles put out at least 2 albums a year. Rubber Soul and Revolver came out the same year, 1966, like 6 months apart. Led Zeppelin 1 and Led Zeppelin 2 came out, one in January 69, and I think Led Zeppelin 2 was either July, August, or 69. I remember they used to put the singles on the radio first. It's hard to tell when the album came, but they were 6 months apart. There was all these great bands that were just, cranking stuff. Everyone you could imagine at that time. I remember even Queen, when Queen came out, I think their first album was
Their
71.
first 2, yeah, were close.
They were 6 months apart.
Yeah.
First one, great album. I love it. I love the hard rock. I love the really bone-crunching stuff. That's why my favorite albums by them are the first one and Sheer Heart Attack.
Stone Cold Crazy's on.
Is on
the
Sheer.
Is on Sheer Heart. Is it Sheer Heart Attack? Yeah.
Yeah, and that those 2 albums are like Brian May's got the pedal of the metal. It is just. And later they became a different band. They became more of a pop band, and they didn't have as much guitar. He had his great solos, but they were doing songs like Under Pressure and Bicycle, and Radio Gaga and stuff. I mean, I liked it, but it wasn't like that.
Yeah, it wasn't balls to the wall.
I was always, having grown up in the Deep Purple, Black Sabbath age, I always had that hard rock, metal thing. So
it was almost like British new wave of heavy metal.
Yeah.
Some of those early Queen.
It was songs. That first album, I said, go back and listen to it. My God, it's unbelievable. So the interesting thing was, they had a minor hit here in the U.S. off of that album called "Keep Yourself Alive," which barely cracked.
Yeah.
So they wanted a second album, and at the time, they you got to get it out in 6 months. So they did Queen 2, which was interesting project. It was, I think Freddie wrote one side, which was, if I remember, the White Queen, and Brian May wrote the other side, the Black Queen.
Interesting.
But it didn't. It was rushed out, and from what I understand, wasn't what they wanted.
Is Ogre Battle on that one or
No.
whatever?
I don't. Well, yes, I'm not sure. I thought
I'll have
Ogre
to
Battle
revisit
was on.
these.
But anyway, what happened was I remember reading a quote from Brian May. We used to read all the magazines back there: Cream, Rolling Stone. There was one called Circus, which was fantastic. Circus came with a fold-out poster and a calendar that was like so cool. I mean, people still look for these on the internet, especially if they still have the posters.
Never mind. I was handling those.
I had more than one of those calendars hanging in my room, But I remember reading this quote by Brian May when the second album, really kind of didn't do well. He bitterly said something to the press like, you have your whole life to make your first album. You have 6 months to make your second. He was very unhappy, and then they rallied and said, well, their third album, which was Sheer Heart Attack, is going to be different. That had Killer Queen on it, but that album, boom, that was when it, because they were doing well overseas. They were huge in the UK and Europe, but they hadn't really cracked the American market yet. I saw them on the Night at the Opera tour, and they played, was it the Orpheum or the Music Hall? The Music Hall is now the Bach Center, the Wang or whatever, the Bach. But they weren't big enough to play Boston Garden. They couldn't sell enough tickets, and they actually opened the show. We had great seats. They opened the show with Bohemian Rhapsody. And nobody knew it. It was a brand new album. We didn't really know the song. I think we had barely heard it. It wasn't like, the monster it is now, the iconic monster. But they kept the curtains closed, and they played the entire intro on tape, because they couldn't do, in those days, this is 75, I think, they couldn't do the opening live. It was with all the vocal, overdubbing, all the layered stuff. So it started out with like kind of smoke machines and a closed curtain, and it's is this the real life? And so they go through the whole a cappella kind of thing. And when the instruments came in, the curtains opened up and they go slamming into the when it starts to rock. But that just goes to show they were selling out stadiums in Europe. But they still hadn't cracked. But then that changed from then on. What started with Sheer Heart Attack just blew up after that with The Night at the Opera. I mean, that was the 1-2 punch.
What a great was that the first time you heard that song?
Yeah, I think
that's crazy first exposure.
I might have heard it on the radio. I'm trying to remember if I recognized it. I think it wasn't a single, so I don't think it was a single. It might have been. It's going back so far, but I think I did recognize it when they opened the show with it. But
what was the song about the woman who crossed Freddie or something? I think that was the single.
Maybe. Yeah.
What's that called? Whatever.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, Who's Next was supposed to be a much bigger. But we digress. It was supposed to be a much bigger thing, but Townsend got sick of the record label saying, "Where's the album? Where's the album?" So he just put what he had. All those songs were part of Lifehouse. Just put it, instead of being like a narrative, he just put it out and said, "Here." He got disgusted and just said, "Take it as is." And and that happened to everybody. The biggest stars in the world, Brian Wilson. They bugged him. So bad about the follow-up to Pet Sounds, which was supposed to be Smile, about that.
Yep.
And that really literally crashed and burned, and the songs from Smile wound up on other albums, and some of them, it was never fully realized. Or
what a shame.
I know, because he was really, according to everybody he worked with, Van Dyke Parks and everyone else, he was really onto something that would have... And he was inspired by Sgt. Pepper. They were always trying to one-up each other. Paul McCartney has often said that Pepper was inspired by Pet Sounds. So there was this, the competition makes for good music, and that's what they were doing. Literally, when he heard Pet Sounds, he was like, we got to do better. It was his... he was the one who came up with the whole idea of them being another band, being Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And then I told you when the Beach Boys heard it, supposedly they heard it, very early on.
They all sat down.
They all sat there in quiet, and somebody in the room, I think it was Brian Wilson, said, "Fuck, what are we going to do now?" And Brian was like, "Well, my next project is going to be," and that's what he was working on when the record label just... the pressure got to him,
That's crazy.
I know, it's amazing. Nowadays, you can go years without an album, and you'll still have your fans. Back in those days, they honestly believed that if you didn't put an album out or two every year, that kids would forget about you and go on to whoever the next big thing was. It was like you had to sort of, even Sgt. Pepper. I mean, the first two songs they recorded for Pepper was Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. And George Martin said he used to come around and talk. I saw him at Berkeley, the School of Music here. He said the worst decision he ever made was to give those two songs to Capitol, because they were complaining that there hadn't been a Beatles album in over 6 months. Can you imagine that? Oh, after Rubber Soul and Revolver in '66, the 6-month period had gone by, and they were like, "Oh, you got to give us something." And he said, "Fine," just like Brian Wilson, "here's these two," and they put it out as a single. And so in those days, they thought, well, since they already bought it as a single, our fans, we're not going to put it on the album. We're not going to make them buy it again, which nobody would think that today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So could you imagine, let's just say Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields were on Pepper. I mean, it's already one of the greatest albums of all time. But with those two songs on it, I mean, say it took the place of When I'm 64, Penny Lane, and side two, instead of opening with Within You, Without You, the Harrison sitar thing, which is good. Imagine if side two opened with Strawberry Fields.
Untouchable.
It's just untouchable. It would be even more incredible. But you know, it is what it is. It's just, it's just they had to,
Bands have it so easy nowadays. They
Well,
got
they
Pro
do.
Tools.
Yeah.
They got. I talked to this band. Craig. He was in this band Ruffians.
Yeah.
And the studio gave them 24 hours to record the record.
Really.
24 hours.
Yeah.
Like ridiculous.
That's
now,
tight.
now it's like, I got to set up. Let's just take 5 months to record this thing,
Well, sometimes it works out for the better when you're under the pressure, and sometimes it doesn't,
Yeah.
I mean,
sometimes it does, I guess. Yeah.
more often it doesn't, but sometimes it does because you catch a spark.
Do you think there were so many great albums in the 70s? I feel like all those bands kind of got burnout by the time kind of like the mid 80s rolled around. Do you feel that's
I don't know
why?
if that's true across the board. I think that a lot of them got rich and got heavily into drugs.
That's
Which
definitely
will
a huge part of it.
Definitely put a dent in your creative process.
Yeah.
And when everybody around you is telling you how great you are, that becomes a problem with egos.
Yeah.
So who knows? It's probably different in everybody's case, but people definitely did things that if they were thinking rationally, they wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
That sabotaged their careers or sank their bands.
Oh, yeah.
Or just didn't give a fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you got to realize one thing that, my opinion, but it's absolutely, I think it's true. All my friends agree. The 60s wasn't the great time you think it was. It was filled with social unrest, the Vietnam War, the riots with, just everything that was going on. I mean, you had people on campuses rioting. You had all those assassinations, the Kennedys and Martin Luther King. You had people fighting for, women's rights. You had people fighting for, black rights and everything. It was really a very volatile. They say 1968 might have been the most violent year ever in this country with RFK and Martin Luther and everything. But the 70s were actually the party after the 60s. That's what happened.
Do you think the 70s is the best decade for music?
I think it's hard to say. A lot of great music in the 60s. You can't deny that. In the 70s, there's a lot of great music, too. The 60s might be a little better. I don't know. Pretty even. But 70s were definitely the party after the 60s. That was when, everything broke loose. The drinking age was 18. People, Planned Parenthood, girls that were underage could get birth control without their parents' consent. There was no Mothers Against Drunk Driving, didn't form until 1980. We didn't have to worry about, AIDS or COVID or any of that kind of stuff. It was just
like rug burn. That was it.
Yeah, and rug burn, and that was really the sexual revolution, and that was the time when cocaine was just, and that's what you're saying. I think that's why I think a lot of this was the drugs and the time, and just I think if the 60s are better musically, I think it's because the 70s. Just this all adversely affect music,
Well, to bring up cocaine, or you're talking about cocaine, and we were talking about Sabbath earlier. When they were recording Volume 4 in the Mansion, they were getting cereal boxes of cocaine.
Oh, but this was like, if you read anything, this is actually a great book that I would recommend called. I think it's still in print. I think you get it for like under $5 at Amazon. It's called Hitmen. It's all about the mobs. It's a double entendre. It's all about the mobs. It's a light read. It's a great read. All about the mobs in influence and ownership of the music business in the 60s and 70s. It is priceless. How the mob used them, because the music business was a sexy way to launder money and to move drugs. And they could get anybody to play their daughter's Sweet 16 or Bar Mitzvah or something. You want Frank's on it? No problem. But the thing of it is you have whole chapters about record labels, like Casablanca Records because of the Kiss and everything.
Yep.
Casablanca was like, there's the guy who was head of Casablanca there. What was his name? Neil Bogart. That's why you
Yes.
had. That's why you
Yeah,
had
yeah,
the smoking man on the label, because he sort of fancies himself as Humphrey Bogart, sort of that Casablanca looking guy, you know. And he, of course, died early. I think he was only 40, but they in this book they just line how much drugs and stuff was going through the movie. You would go into his offices in L.A. or anything, and the secretary would have drawers full of it, and they were removing so much drugs, they were removing so much everything, money laundering, and it was just. I think one of the great quotes, the great thing about the book is that he said if you drove past Casablanca's offices in L.A. in the late 70s, he says it looked like a Cadillac dealership, because everyone who worked there owned a Cadillac, and everyone who visited there, it was just, I mean, it just sums up the time. And I think that didn't have a real positive effect on the music business, you know.
Not at all, because it became the music business is a business, but the emphasis on the business part, I think, really ruined things for people.
People, the society was so different. It was 180 degrees from what it is now. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have parents tracking us on cell phones. Nobody knew where the hell we were, and we liked it that way. And everyone just did their thing, and people didn't demonize you or, call you out as being un-PC or, woke or whatever the hell it is. But you just had things like, for instance, you had Studio 54, Sodom and Gomorrah in a nightclub. And you had people they had trends that you never, not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying this is the way it was. And this is a reason that a lot of things were the way they was. Of course, Reagan got in 1980 and changed everything overnight. Just say no to drugs, which is, a good thing. You don't want to promote that too much. It was definitely out of hand in the 70s. But people there was a fad where people used to wear Coke spoons around their neck. And it all started, believe it or not.
That's funny.
They're not going to like, we're not sponsored by McDonald's, are we?
No.
It all started with McDonald's. They had these coffee stirrers that were these long plastic spoons with a little spoon on the end that you use for sugar. It was just enough sugar for your coffee. It wasn't a big spoon. It was a little spoon. Well, it didn't take kids long enough to figure out this was perfect for Coke. Just a little, so it fit underneath your nose perfectly. And they used so it became real trendy to use these plastic McDonald's stirrers. So if you were somebody like a famous person in those days, a celebrity, actress, musician, you could afford, like today, like a Kardashian or something, you could afford to have these things custom made, and they would make them out of gold and silver.
Wow.
So, and they would wear them like, the disco kind of thing, like this thing. They would wear these around their necks with their shirts unbuttoned. They would have gold and silver to show you were a playa. They would have these gold and silver Coke spoons hanging around your neck. You think people would say, oh, that's sending the wrong message? These were, that you look up to, like people do their Kardashians or anything like that. But they would sit there, not saying they did that, but people would look at these people and go, hey, that's so cool,
Wow.
These are celebrities promoting this. And you had sports figures doing this too.
Well,
yeah.
When was this?
The 70s.
The 70s?
Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
They wouldn't wear them while they're playing. You wouldn't see them out there on the mound pitching with them or anything. But then when they were running around town in their Ferraris and stuff like that, they would be down at, here in Boston, there were a few places. There was Narcissus and stuff like that. You'd see them running around town with their, their disco stuff and everything like. And you can't imagine a sports figure. I could name some, but I'm not going to. But you could imagine a sports figure today if they did something like that. They would be canceled so fast.
Oh, yeah. They'd be out of the league instantly.
I'm not glorifying that culture. I'm just saying that it was so different, and it had an effect on everything. That was the party. I mean, I think if you were to look at, even the Roaring 20s with F. Scott Fitzgerald and everything that happened before the Depression, I think the 70s were probably the party decade, it seems like. I wasn't around for the 1920s or anything like that, but that was when all hell broke loose, and since then it's been moving the other direction.
Wow, so we can blame McDonald's for turning cocaine into a fashion statement.
That's supposedly from living through it. I can remember that's where it started, because that's where my friends were sort of getting their ideas from. McDonald's doesn't put that in their history, by the way. So
No, I did not see
what are
that
you gonna
in the
do?
founder.
You know, yeah. Ray Kroc wasn't really fond of that being the inspiration.
I don't think I've ever and you know, we're like an hour and a half.
Oh, we should get going.
Into
I
this.
haven't eaten. Yeah, it's
But-
too much, and
but
I talk
wanna,
too much.
It's all right. I want to ask two things. I'd love to know, and I don't think I ever asked what your favorite record is.
Oh, we don't have one. Are you kidding?
You don't have a favorite album?
That's like your favorite kids.
Do you have like a top? What's a record that's in your top three?
Jeez, it changes. Too.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it changes. I mean,
Well, all right. Currently,
God,
top five.
that's a good question. I like one of the bands you like a lot. I don't know if it'd be in there, but I like Ghost a lot.
Ghost.
Yeah, I really do.
As a, like a top right currently.
Yeah.
What record?
Well, the one that has
Meliora.
No, the one that has little sunshine.
Impera?
Oh yeah, I
That's
listen to that a
amazing.
lot. I like that record a lot.
It's I've seen the tour of it 3 times.
Yeah.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
good. Such a great band. Wow.
I mean, favorite records are sort of like, if you asked me that in the '80s, Meat Puppets 2.
You brought Meat Puppets.
Meat Puppets 2. There wouldn't have been a grunge movement. Not like it was. There wouldn't have been a Nirvana or a Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or any of that stuff without Meat Puppets in the early '80s making the music they did. Meat Puppets 2 was like, I think it was Kurt Cobain's favorite record when he was in high school. I think it came out when he was like a senior in high school. And to prove it, I mean, when they did the Nirvana Unplugged, they had the Meat Puppets on. That Unplugged, and they did. I understand that the unedited one, they did 4 cuts for Meat Puppets 2, which is saying something, all from that album, and 2 of them made air, which was Plateau and Lake of Fire. But that album just still stands up with me, and the band from Minneapolis that I love so much is the Replacements. Their album that came out in '86 on Twin Tone, Let It Be, is just. There's 2 of my favorite albums of the '80s, and plus a lot of metal stuff too. But I mean, the Replacements were sort of in the '80s what the Rolling Stones should have been. Their way of just not giving a fuck what anybody cared and just making music and making trouble and being snotty and encompassing the true spirit of rock and roll. It's not pretty.
They have an album
it's
called
ragged.
100%. They have an album called Let It Be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you recommended that to
Oh,
me.
my
It's
God.
fantastic.
It is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's become more so over the years where you have to find all these like unknown developing artists and established artists doing covers of songs from that album.
Yeah.
Joan Jett and the guy from I can't remember, the guy who was the transvestite in the band I can't, this is terrible, Mary Grace or something his name is.
Okay.
And of all people, Miley Cyrus, who is a real artist, and I will say that at any time, she's performed with the Flaming Lips. She's done things that are amazing outside of her wheelhouse and everything, I know people will crucify me for that, but I said the same thing about Lady Gaga when people are saying, oh, she's just another, fancy costumes, Grace Jones kind of thing, Madonna. And I was like, no, she's got chops. She's the real deal. And here she is. It's hard to believe almost 25 years later, because I think her first thing came out around 2000 or 2001 or something. But I'm saying Joan Jett, Mary Grace, that's his name, I can't remember. God, it's terrible. And they did this backyard series of concerts that you can see on YouTube, and they did a song called Androgynous off of that album.
A fantastic song.
And,
yeah.
Westerberg, their thing is, it's very ragged and, almost sounds demo-ish. But,
Yeah, it
and
does.
I love the feeling it's got. But they did this sort of reinterpretation of song, and here you've got Joan Jett, who's gay. You got a trans guy, girl from, I can't remember the band again, and Miley Cyrus, who is openly bisexual and everything, singing this song Androgynous, and their version is absolutely incredible. But that album just keeps and
It's a great record.
And on that, and I think it's that album, they do Kiss's Black Diamond.
So good.
Which is
That's such a good
fantastic.
cover. I listened to that recently, actually.
Absolutely.
So good. When you that was the first thing you ever showed me by that band.
Oh, my
Because we were
God.
talking about Kiss 1, and you're like, oh, have you heard, this cover?
I knew the song. It was one of my favorite Kiss songs, and I'm not a big Kiss fan because I'm sort of after that. I came along. They were after my time a little bit in high school, but I do like some of their songs a lot, and that's one of them that I've always liked. I've always liked Strutter. I've always liked
Their second record, Hotter
Yeah.
Than Hell's Great, Parasite.
Oh, yeah. And I've always liked Detroit Rock City, and I've always liked, they're an incredible band, and they sort of embody the true spirit of rock and roll, I think, where it isn't all polish and promotion and slick videos and stuff. But
Yeah. Now before we go, I want you to recommend 5 records. This is very extensive knowledge. You have so many albums here, and you give me amazing recommendations. I just want 5 recommendations. Doesn't have to be metal. Doesn't have to be a specific genre. Just off the top of your head, that maybe albums that people don't really know and should know.
well, if people are trying to get
Of course, there's Kinks' Greatest Hits, which is your go-to.
Yeah, if people are trying to get into, a certain genre or a band that they're not familiar with, there are things I recommend. Like, for instance, if you want alternative music, and you got to listen to it because it's not going to. A lot of stuff isn't going to grab you the first time around. I would definitely recommend Meat Puppets too, which is just such a touchstone for a lot of things, and they did a lot of great stuff after that too. I definitely would recommend Let It Be by The Replacements. I definitely would recommend something like, if you really want to get into the Kinks, Village Green Preservation Society, which is their masterpiece, surrounded by masterpieces. But that should affect you in a way that you want to hear more stuff like that. Are you talking about
Just whatever, like for
jazz?
Example, it doesn't matter. Like for example, Moondog or something. I think you recommended me Moondog at one point.
Yeah.
Well, it, again, doesn't have to be a specific genre,
Moondog,
just
folks,
an album.
Is a guy he was like a 7 foot. I don't think he was 7 foot. He's 7 foot with the horns on. He had a Viking helmet, and he dressed like a Viking. He carried a great big spear.
He was blind, right?
He was blind. And he used to busk in Manhattan during the 50s, 60s, and I think by the early 70s he had moved to Germany. But he was sort of a savant in the sense that he he could play music like it was a combination of jazz and classical and African rhythms, if you can imagine that. And that's not even doing him justice. I mean, this guy, and he used to play this on the street, and he was noticed by a lot of people in Manhattan who had big connections. People like, I think that's probably...
Well, that's the timer.
Hang on.
You're getting locked out.
I'm getting locked up. Yes, I'm going home with Brandon tonight.
Yeah.
But, yeah,
Let's get outta here.
Moondog. Google Moondog. You will be amazed. He got noticed by some very powerful people in the music business, and they came to his aid when Alan Freed tried to use the name Moondoggy. Alan Freed was the DJ who was disgraced for payola in the 50s, and he actually said that he coined the phrase rock and roll.
Really?
Yes,
oh, yeah, I heard it. I learned about that.
But he tried to use Moondog, and they actually went to court and kept him from using Moondog. But he made a couple of records, believe it or not, the strangest thing, and it gets weirder, he made a couple of records for Columbia in the early 60s, which I let Brandon hear, and I got to tell you, they're really interesting, especially the first one, is dynamite, like nothing you've ever heard. And what's really interesting is before he did that, he produced Julie Andrews' first album on Columbia. Julie Andrews, long before.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Long before the sound, I have it here. Long before he actually, she was in, Sound of Music or anything like that. I think in 1958 or 59, he was the producer. He was one of the producers on it. This guy who was basically a homeless street person.
Since that's a recommendation you gave me, we'll just add that. So you would say Meat Puppets, Let It Be.
Well, get the Moondog one, the first one. You can still find
Moondog
that out
one.
there. If you're into jazz, get Ellington's Indigos or Ellington at Newport. And if people
Ellington
are getting
at Newport.
and if people are getting into metal, I always recommend Sabbath. But probably one of my favorite albums is still. I mean, I like Sabbath more, but Master of Puppets, I just never get enough of.
Master of Puppets.
That was like, everything after that, we'll talk. But,
Yeah.
I just think that was their pinnacle.
Yeah,
My
I
opinion.
agree. I agree.
It still holds up so well and everything.
Yeah, Dave. There's a couple Dave riffs on that one.
Yeah.
For me, it's a Rust in Peace.
Yeah.
I think is like the magnum opus of thrash metal.
Well,
Holy Wars,
you
Hangar 18.
You can name a lot of stuff in metal. It's a whole different subject. You can metal, Rain and Blood. I mean, is like
it could be a
are you
whole nother
kidding me?
episode. Yeah.
There's so much good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
so.
Well, hey, if you want to
Anyway.
shoot a little commercial real quick,
Cheap Thrills Music. Come down and see us.
Dedham,
And I
Massachusetts.
will bore the hell out of you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, man.
Thank you.
It's been an honor.
This man's going to be famous. Next time he's going to Austin and he's going to be a famous comic. And then he's going to have me, when I show up backstage, thrown out. Release the hounds.
I'm Brandon Battick, and this is Disturbing the Priest.